everyone, Izza here, welcome back to my channel. This video is the fourth and final part in my Ares cosplay build series from the game Hades. In this video I'm going to show you how I made the props and accessories for my Ares cosplay. So that is the sword, the helmet, some armbands, the wig and the crown. And of course then you get a look at the finished costume all together, but first let's get started with making some props. First up is the sword. First, I drew up and cut out a 2-size pattern for my sword. If you want to see an in-depth look at drawing up sword patterns, I covered that in my Stygian blade build video. I divided the pattern where the handle will be made detachable from the rest of the sword. I used PVC pipe for the handle core and wooden dowel for the blade core, with a PVC attachment to hold them together. I traced the blade pattern onto 8mm foam twice, and cut the pieces out. Then I flip it to the back and cut a trench on the inside of the blade pieces. On one blade piece, I hot glue the dowel core into the trench, and glue them together with the dowel inside to keep it sturdy. With the blades stuck together, I use my Dremel to sand down the beveled edges to make sure they match up. I then use a few strips of 5mm foam to start building out the hilt of the blade. The pipe attachment for the handle is also hidden inside here. I cut a second detail layer for the blade from 2mm foam and glue one onto each side of the sword, and then sand down its edges too. Finally, I lathered up the blade in a bunch of filler to fill any possible gaps and seam lines. Next, I coat the PVC pipe for the handle in 2 layers of 3mm foam to bulk it out, leaving the part of the pipe that needs to be inserted into the hilt uncovered. I then shave down the pommel end of the handle to give it the rounded shape in my reference image. To create the pommel, I used 2 foam spikes. I cut the end off one of them and glued it to the base of the other, then glued it onto the end of the handle. Finally, I used my wood burner to carve the lines into the handle. In the reference image, these look pretty rough-hewn and uneven, so the wood burner seemed like a good way to achieve this. And here is the sword so far. Now it needs to be primed and painted. I used multiple layers of black hexflex to prime the sword, starting with the handle and then the blade. Then I could start painting. I started with the gold on the pommel and the hilt. Then a mixture of white and buff titanium for the rest of the handle. For the blade itself, I mixed dark silver with a tiny amount of rose gold to give the metal a warmer tone to it. I felt this would look good with the red section of the blade. In order to paint that red section, I first masked off the silver areas after sealing the paint. I then painted the red section without fear of messing up those super clean lines. Like in my previous videos in this series, most of the paints I'm using here are Hexflex paints from Polyprops, which are designed to remain flexible when dry, which makes them great for painting foam props and armor. When the red paint was dry, I removed the masking tape. I then moved on to weathering, starting with a brown wash on the handle, and adding some black into the carved lines. For the blade, I added some black weathering around where the silver and red sections of the blade met. I mixed red and yellow to dry brush onto the edge of the blade, as that had looked really good on my Stygian blade. I then did a very light black wash over the silver part of the blade. I wanted to keep the weathering pretty minimal and selective on these props, just like with the armor, as I was trying to keep the bold, cartoony look of the game in mind. And with that, the sword was finished. Next up is the helmet. I apologise for the lack of footage of me actually drawing this pattern, but I basically based it on the old pattern for my Cassandra helmet, and then edited it to make it look more like this more basic Corinthian helmet that Ares has. I also knew I wasn't going to need or be able to wear this helmet while actually in the cosplay, it's just a prop to hold, so precise sizing didn't matter too much. After cutting out the pattern, I cut out the registration marks. And then transferred the pattern to 5mm foam. Traced the pattern pieces, and cut them out. I started gluing them together with the darts on each of the pieces, which started to give it its curved shapes. I then glued the two front pieces together and started to assemble the rest of the helmet. I used my Dremel to sand down seam lines as I went, as it's easier to reach them before the whole thing is stuck together in some places. Finally, I attached the long lower half of the helmet to the domed top half. And glued a foam half dowel to the bottom of the helmet. And cleaned it up with the Dremel again. Then I could attach the minimal detail pieces, starting with these brow ridges. Next, I carved out the big crossed battle damage scrape in the helmet by cutting beveled trenches into the foam. And then finishing it off with my Dremel. Finally, I glued some foam spikes onto the helmet and primed it in black Hexflex. When it was primed, I painted it in a base of gold. I added a little weathering with some darker gold mixed with brown, and some dry brushed highlights by mixing gold with iridescent white. But I was still going for that cartoony look, so I tried to be very sparing with it. After I had sealed the gold layer, I masked off around the crossed scar and painted it in red. I then removed the masking tape and added some shading to the scar with red mixed with brown for a slightly darker tone. I then added some sparingly placed black lines to a few spots on the helmet. And sealed the finished helmet. Ares also has some silver armbands, which I made by cutting out strips of 3mm foam. I sanded down their edges, and then glued their ends together against a piece of elastic. And then they got the usual treatment, priming in black and painted in silver. Next, I styled this lace front wig. First, I cut off the lace. Then I styled the front on the right side and trimmed down and styled the left side. Aries has a full-on, shaved undercut in his character art, but my hair is really thick, so I just sort of adapted this hairstyle to suit me so that I don't have to stuff all my hair under a bald cap as well as a wig. Finally, I made the crown. I started by cutting some strips of wire, one long enough to go around my whole head. I then made 3 sizes of patterns for the spiked leaves. Then I traced my leaf patterns onto 2mm foam, cutting out 2 sides for each leaf. I glued the leaf pieces together with the wire sandwiched in between, creating a ridge in the middle and also making them malleable. The 2 longest leaves went on the ends of the headband piece. I then glued a strip of 2mm foam onto the length of wire. Before adding the other side of the foam sandwich, I trimmed down the wire on the smaller leaves and glued them across the whole headband. Then I glued down the other strip of foam, securing all the leaves in place and coating the wire. I sanded down the edges of the headband. And I finished it off by adding some foam clay for extra securing and to create a more flowing shape between the crown and the spikes. Then I primed the crown in black and painted it in aged silver. I sealed the base layer and did a black wash for some weathering. And then dry brushed paler silver onto the crown. When it was sealed and dry, I glued magnets onto the crown. I could then easily bend the crown into the correct shape thanks to the wires inside it. I also glued magnets onto the wig, so I could attach the crown to the wig and have it look like it was just floating there, like in the design. And finally, my Aries cosplay was complete and I could try on the whole thing together. It was also time to organise a photo shoot, and for that I reached out to my good friend Carlos, and we used his home studio setup to shoot the Aries cosplay. I also brought along my Stygian blade to use in some of the shots. We used a couple of different backdrops, had some very important dance breaks, experimented with lighting, and got some really cool results that were definitely worth the wait. And here they are! I really love how Carlos's photos turned out, and I think they show off this costume so well. Seeing proper photos of a finished cosplay is always so satisfying, getting to see all that hard work come together and collaborate with a photographer to really bring the character to life. If you want to see more of Carlos's work, I've put a link to his socials in the description below the video. And of course, once again thank you to Polyprops who provided me with many of the materials I used in this build. There is also a link to their website in the description as well. And that's it! My Aries cosplay is finally finished, or, well, this video series is finally finished after I finished my Aries cosplay ages ago and then only just got around to doing a photo shoot and editing the video now for numerous reasons. One of which is that as of posting this video, I'm probably going to be about a week or 2 away from moving my entire life to another city and studying a master's degree in prosthetic effects, which is super exciting, and I'm really thrilled to be moving my career in this direction and refocusing things for myself. But it sadly also means that I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with this channel for the next year. I know that I probably won't have the time or the space to do build videos like this where I'm going to be living. Maybe I'll use this channel to make some other kinds of videos, or maybe I won't have the time because, well, I'll be doing a master's degree. But I wanted to make sure I at least wrapped up my Aries cosplay and the videos to go with it before I moved. Whatever happens next with this channel, thank you so much for the support I've received so far. I've really had a lot of fun working on these videos, and it was a great way to stay creative during the pandemic. As well as that, I know that a lot of the builds I worked on for these videos kind of helped me shift my focus in the direction of prosthetic effects, so I feel like this YouTube channel probably helped me realize that was what I wanted to do. And hey, if you're new, why not subscribe to my channel and check out the rest of my videos? You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at EvilCleverDog. Thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you next time.